Welcome back to Virginia Reports. I am Ryan Gilchrist. Joining me today are Kara Peters, Maryum Elnasseh, Abby Sachs, and Audrey Nakagawa. We're talking about the reaction of colleges around Virginia to the recent police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and subsequent protests and demonstrations that have erupted over police brutality against people of color, specifically Black people. Many universities and presidents have responded to this, and the reactions have come up a little short in the eyes of many around the state, specifically students attending the universities. Kara, can you tell us a little more about the issue, and specifically as it relates to UVA, which you're a student?
Yes. The UVA president, Jim Ryan, did release a statement on May 31st in the wake of police brutalities and racial injustices enacted with specifically Black people. And to be quite honest, his language was was very disheartening. Coming from a Black student myself, it was definitely insensitive. It came off as, the language just was not appropriate in identifying the Black community. In his post, he did not mention the word Black. He did not mention police brutalities. And it did not take long for people to have negative feedback towards his Instagram post. He also put it on Twitter. It did not take long for people to negatively retweet it, to comment. And it was something that people, even now, are still responding in regards to what he said, how broad his statement was, and the little that he mentioned or at all for moving forward. So just to show, was not something that really was comforting, I would say. And a lot of people, a lot of faculty, a lot of students were very disappointed with the statement that he put out.
Abby, can you give us a little more detail about what the reaction was and what students and faculty were saying?
Yes, as a fellow UVA student, I saw many negative responses to his statement. One particular very strong response was rising second-year student Ziana Bryant, who is an activist and organizer in Charlottesville. She, on Twitter, announced that she would be resigning from her position on Ryan's executive council on UVA community partnerships because she said that she, quote, felt that his statement makes it clear that they do not care about me or others who look like me. And there were other student reactions that were negative. The Cavalier Daily issued an editorial board saying that they were disappointed in the statement as well. And it was just a very overall negative sentiment towards his letter.
Now, there were similar reactions around the state to other university president responses and university responses, and we'll get to more on that in just a few minutes, but I wanted to touch a little bit on the issues, student reactions, and how students around the state are viewing this. Maryum, let me turn to you. You're a student at VCU, and we've seen over the past few nights some considerable clashes between protesters and police and unrest in Richmond. VCU's campus is right downtown in Richmond. Can you tell me sort of your reaction and what you've been seeing the last couple of days?
Yeah, so there have been nonstop protests for the last 4 nights in Richmond. And on Sunday afternoon, the mayor put in effect a curfew at 8 p.m., an indefinite curfew. And since then, students have still been protesting. And on Sunday night, over 250 people got arrested, many of them students. And now the VCU Police Department does work with the Richmond Police Department. And the Richmond Police Department has been tear gassing peaceful protests as well as journalists for the last 2 nights. And while the Richmond Police Department and the Richmond mayor have issued apologies for especially last night's events where a peaceful demonstration was tear gassed before the curfew even took place. However, VCU has not made any statements at all since Sunday, since the curfew took place. There hasn't been any mention of the students being arrested or tear gassed, or their relationship between the VCU Police Department and the Richmond Police Department, which was responsible for these events.
Audrey, as a student at JMU, what are you hearing from your fellow students? What's been the reaction up that way?
Yeah, so similar to what has already been said, President Alger made a statement of his own on May 31st, and he was clear that he stood with people of color in this situation, but he failed to use the words racism, police brutality, white supremacy, and students took to Twitter to let him know that they were upset with his wording and not taking a stark stance on it. However, in contrast, what's really interesting here is JMU SGA made their own statement, which did include that language. They acknowledged police brutality and racism, and they said, quote unquote, that they stand in solidarity with all protests and demonstrations. And then they had asked JMU student organizations to sign the statement in solidarity, and 22 organizations signed that statement. However, I personally think that there may have been more organizations that stand with them. There was just like a really short turnaround for when organizations could sign the statement because they wanted to get that out quickly. However, one thing that President Alger did that a lot of other Virginia University presidents did not is he had a clear action for the future. He said that he wanted to host virtual town halls in collaboration with a lot of JMU organizations to open a dialogue about what has been happening. So that's something different that JMU responded with in regards to recent events of racial injustice.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the future response here in just a minute. But before we do that, you mentioned organizations. And Kara, I know you're strongly affiliated with the National Association of Black Journalists. You've been having discussions all week related to responses on this, as well as seeing what other organizations are doing. What can you tell us, and what have you been working on?
Yes, so as co-president of the National Association of Black Journalists at UVA, we did immediately release a statement, not only in support of the families of those who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality, but we also made sure to specifically address and respond to the statement that was released by President Jim Ryan. We released that the next day after he had released his statement, and you see a lot of other Black contracted independent organizations, or otherwise known as CIOs at UVA, that had done the same. So it did not take long for not just NABJ at UVA to release a statement addressing the comments that were made, but also Black Student Alliance has already released a statement. With their statement, they have a list of demands that they are hoping to be implemented as soon as possible. So there was a letter by Black Student Alliance that went on Instagram, Twitter, what have you. And there was also a letter that went out from a separate group of students, specifically and majority Black students, who came together to write a letter in response to the language that was from this post. From that letter, I myself being one of the co-authors, there were probably over 50 student organizations that did sign, as well as about 400 signatures from students. And the list is still increasing. People are still signing. We're still getting the word out to express that the language was not appropriate and we do not stand for it. This is not just from BSA that I mentioned. This is not just from my own specific organization, nor the student group that did release their own letter, but you're also seeing many other Black organizations at UVA that are releasing statements that are expressing how they feel towards the post that was made. Also being a part of Black President's Council, there's also a statement going out for that, attaching the links of the many CIOs that have already signed, that have already released a statement. So needless to say, as soon as the post went out, there have been movements, there have been responses, there have been statements to specifically respond to the language that was made by President Jim Ryan.
Abby, the lack of a forward-looking plan was one of the criticisms of President Ryan's response. Is that correct?
Yes. a lot of students expressed disappointment in his lack of trying to create change in wake of the protests because UVA has a history of racial injustice and racism. It was built by slaves, and it was the home to the August 11th and 12th white supremacist rallies a couple years ago. As well, we still have many buildings named after eugenicists. So many people called on President Ryan to create change and make plans to create a more welcoming environment at the campus. In the Cavalier Daily editorial board's article, they stated that Ryan's lack of a definitive plan towards combating structural inequality in the university community illustrates a lack of concern for his role his institution plays in systemic oppression. On Twitter, an associate professor, John Edwin Mason, stated that he suggests that we openly dedicate ourselves to uprooting all traces of racism and patriarchy on grounds. And that was just a source of disappointment to a lot of students because UVA has such a history in racism.
Maryum, the letter from VCU's president received less criticism, but there were still some comments and concerns about it. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, so VCU also posted its official response early Sunday afternoon. And in the letter, President Michael Rao did call out and condemn the distressing, horrific events against African Americans specifically. And he made note of individual, institutional, and structural racism and called it still a tragic reality in our country. However, he also did not make any specific mention of police brutality, and the similar criticisms from students who immediately took to Twitter to voice their disappointment as well. Essentially, their main concern was with these being empty words. One student replied, here's the question: if you really feel that way, when will you stop using your university as a driving force of gentrification in Richmond? How will you repay the communities you've ruined? End quote. So the predominant sentiment has been that there's no plan or any way going forward that the president has outlined how VCU will respond to this or what it will actually do to help, considering it also has a racist history as well with the medical school in the past.
Clearly a complicated and difficult issue, especially with Virginia's history. Audrey, Kara, Abby, Maryum, thank you for taking time on this. I understand that it is a difficult time for each of you, and appreciate your time today to talk more. For those of you watching, thank you so much for watching this far. Please do consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We'll have more reporting on this. For now, thank you very much.